Building service contracting and commercial cleaning companies come in all shapes and sizes. Most might think that the larger the company, the more successful it will be. And that could be true. But here's a question to consider. Can a smaller company compete and scale up against a larger company and get those contracts that they want? Can we have what we might call a David versus Goliath business situation? Well, that's our topic today. And to discuss these important points, I welcome two industry pros, Chris Arlen, the president of Revenue IQ, and Brian Cradock, the division president of IFS Group, a Kleen-Tech Services company. And I think we have a great topic today. David versus Goliath. You know, we all know the reference, the biblical reference, I think. So we have to wonder, what can a small company do? So Chris, we're going to start with you. When you think of a David versus Goliath scenario, just how likely is it that a smaller company can take on the larger in competing for business? Can you talk about that a bit?
Contractors generally go after the sides of contract, right? They try and judge whether I'm going to win, is it worth the effort, all those kind of things. And I think in the past, like 10, 20 years ago, maybe, it was very difficult for a small, medium-sized company to win contracts against the larger ones. I think that's all changed. And I've heard some of that thinking still sticks around, that a smaller contractor will be a little anxious or not even go after a medium-sized contract because they're afraid, you know, the big guys are going to jump in, the Goliath can come in and step on them, and the wasted time. I think the reality is changing right now, and I think two things have to do that. Number one, it's the technologies, the availability of technology, right? Contractors can get pretty much the same thing that the large guys do. They buy it. It's a software as a service, cloud-based, but so much of the technology is now available on a purchase as is basis, as needed basis. The other thing is I think contractors are smarter now than they were in the past. Speaking from personal experience, yeah, they are. I think they're smarter. So I think those two things make it a lot more competitive. So I'm not saying that David's going after, you know, the largest contract on the planet, but you can certainly go after the larger ones that maybe in the past they hadn't considered.
Well, Brian, you heard what Chris said. You're a cleaning contractor. I don't know the size of your company, but there's always someone bigger out there. What do you think about what he mentioned?
Yeah, I think he's spot on. There's a lot of truth to that. I think a lot of small and mid-size BSCs are gun shy about going up against the bigger companies because they don't match up. They feel like they don't match up as well. They're wasting their time, or they don't have the credentials or experience to even get in the front door. And I do think Chris is right with, you know, the way the world is today with technology and the way things are presented, that it actually gives everybody more of an opportunity. I think there's a lot less face-to-face interaction at the end of the day when you really come down to closing deals like there may have been in the olden days versus today, where you better make sure you put your best foot forward and whatever comes across the desk for those final few decision makers on that contract that are looking at the numbers, that are looking at the value proposition, that, you know, when they're comparing everybody apples to apples, there's a good chance you're not going to be in that room with everybody lined up next to you. So you need to present well. And I think, you know, there's definitely opportunity there if you play your cards right.
Good thoughts, good strategies. Thank you for that. Chris, let's go back to you. I know you work with cleaning contractors and help them with their proposals. What are some common denominators that you see in some of the successful ones that you just like, that you value?
Again, to the point of contractors being smarter today. I mean, they have access to the information. What I think makes the winning BSCs is when they can apply their smarts. And I think oftentimes it's the first step is, how well do you know your customer, right? As Brian was saying, you know, when they come to make the decision, oftentimes you're not going to get in the room with all of the evaluators, right? But it's the work that the BSC can do ahead of time, create a relationship, Find out information that's not on the client's website, right? I mean, they're not going to tell you, hey, look, the current incumbent left the garage door or the warehouse door open and we lost $500,000 worth of, right, product. That's never in a technical RFP. But that's the kind of information that the contractors, if they apply themselves, they can find out those kind of information through relationships, right? And that's the stuff that helps them, if they can use their smarts, to design a persuasive, compelling solution. And that's how they win bids, right? Because again, they can buy the technology, very similar. And the other thing with buying technologies, in a proposal, you don't have to say you're using it today, because a proposal is what will you do for that customer should you win the contract. So as long as your language in the proposal says we will do this, you're not saying you have, right? It means you can put in your proposal all sorts of technology, right? And then how best to fit what that particular client needs. Maybe it's just a better lock on the warehouse door. I don't know.
Yeah, I would hope the warehouse is locked up, especially if you're taking care of the place. But good example for sure. So, Brian, as I mentioned at the outset, you are division president of IFS Group, a Kleen-Tech Services company, successful company. Talk about your business strategies. If you were to lay out a few things that make your company different, that could go into an RFP, that can go into a proposal, what would that sound like?
What that would sound like, I think, differentiators between IFS Group, being a clean tech company, is that we've been in the business 20 years. So we're a local company that has been in the business 20 years, that has a very hands-on approach with our clients. We know the area, we know the lay of the land, we know the labor, we know the coverage for what the clients are looking for. And bringing in and now being acquired by Kleen-Tech Services, it gives us that extra resources, power to really move the needle forward. We had a lot of success before we were with Kleen-Tech Services, and now we feel like we're going to have a ton of success now being part of that Kleen-Tech Services family. But the biggest differentiators are, going back to what Chris said, creating those relationships early on, separating yourself from the pack. All the big boys, they're all gonna look the same. I mean, if you want to look the same, and not have an opportunity to stand out, then be like everybody else. I mean, learn your customer, learn their needs, put things in there, put information in your proposal that's going to make you stand out. I think we're in a very unique situation because, again, my company, I started from scratch 23 years ago. Now we're part of, I guess you could say, the bigger enterprise wide companies now. So I feel like, we have what it takes from a communication standpoint, from that hands-on standpoint. And now we have the resources that, clients at a bigger level want to make sure that can they really do what they say they're going to do.
That actually was something I was going to ask about. If a organization, a facility is looking to have a cleaning contractor, bring them on, they might say, well, we want to go with a larger national franchise because of what you just mentioned there. So right. What would you say to that?
I've been there. Okay. So go back a few years, go back 5 years, 10 years. I'd say, okay. So sometimes, I think with a smaller contractor, you build those relationships and then may try out the bigger companies. And then after a couple of years, they rebid it again and they bid it again. But if you stay in front of them long enough, you develop that relationship. And it happened with me, you'll get a shot at the larger contracts. You come knocking at the door a few times. It may take you a few times. It may take 2 years. It may take 5 years. But once you get that feather in your cap, that's what helps you get the next one and the next one and the next one. And we all know in this business, there's turnover and nobody's perfect. And it's one of those things that is to everybody's advantage, the large companies and the small companies. I mean, nobody's safe.
And Jeff, I'd like to, can I add to that? Just
add to it. Go ahead.
Brian's point about, even when the big companies are competing against each other, right? Or maybe this was your question. They have many similar things, right? if the largest company was going to win every time, right? You'd be like, oh, we've got 100 million employees. We've been around for 2,000 years, right? That would win every time. And it doesn't, right? That's the reality of this thing. To the factors that Brian was discussing, right? About the clients getting burnt over time with some large. So even in the proposal, the evaluation stage, right? That's when large contractors can look very similar to each other. What do they say? Oh, we're big, we're financially stable, we've been, a long time. And then they say, we've got these cool technologies. Well, that's what's shifted in the market, because now the smaller Davids can go in there. And as long as their presentation, I mean, proposal, right, their website, their presentation deck, as long as they look professional, right, they can now purchase or propose technology, and now they can look just as good as the large guys. And this is where I think the differentiation is about smart. Thus, intelligence is not equated solely to the large contractors, right? It's not a bias towards being large. So you can have a smaller organization that has access to those things, look good, look professional, have access to the technology, but then how smart are they in configuring a really compelling solution? And how well can they tell a really dramatic narrative? And I think that's the opportunities that the Davids have now against Goliath, because the Goliaths are they're going to sound pretty similar, right? Big, 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 big. We're everywhere. Whereas the smaller guy can now go and say, we can do this, we can do this. But what you need, client, is this. And they can tell the story about that. And that's where I think the big difference is today in David versus Goliath.
Well, I do want to know about that company that's 2,000 years old with 100 million employees, but that's another issue we'll dig into, Chris, Mr. Exaggerator that you are.
I told you I was going to get hammered. I was going to get hammered on this.
Chris, I know you use the word appropriately, a narrative. And I'm going to go into a field I'm not really sure about, and that is when you submit a proposal, and Brian, you can comment on this, what's the percentage of those that you just submit on paper compared to those you get the chance to go in person?
Well, Brian said this earlier, is that you as the contractor don't always know that you're going to get in to see in person. Right. That's the ideal. That's the ideal. I mean, if you can control that and say, hey, we got a proposal, let's meet and we'll go walk you through it. That's the ideal. The reality is that your proposal will be in a room with other proposals, right? And that client or that evaluation team are going to be looking at them. So your proposal has to sell for you when you are not in the room, right? So when I say narrative, it's an easily said thing. Oh, narrative story, right? It's hard work, but it has to be really persuasive and compelling and specific and unique. And that's where your proposal document has to have that story, that narrative in there in order to get your presentation, because you're not there. And everybody else is, right? Remember, it's never in a vacuum. It's always going to be A, B, C. And they're going to look at things like the title and the cover letter and the executive summary, how you respond to a question, right? Oh, there you go. Oh, somebody's calling in right now. But those are the things that your document, your proposal's got to do for you. It's got to persuade and win just to get you to the next step, right? Because if it is a large proposal, a large contract you're going after, the buyers are going to want to see you in person, but they're going to make that first cut, right? They're going to wait and rate your responses. And that's to get you just to the next cut. When somebody like Brian can go in and show them that they've got all the goods and they are personally able and credible to deliver.
Right. Brian, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all smart. He's dead on. You're not going to be in the room 9 times out of 10, especially the smaller guy versus with the bigger guys. And you're already knocked down a notch because you're one of the smaller guys. So your presentation is everything. One of the first thing I ever learned in sales was it was proposal writing, and one of the questions that still sticks with me was in our proposal. I worked for a radio station. It was why advertise on radio, and why our radio station? And I've always used, especially the second one, why us? Why us? I think especially in this industry, what makes us unique? What makes us different? You have to stand out. And I don't think a lot of proposals have that in it. At least that's not the feedback that I get for most of the contracts that I've gotten where I've had that opportunity to put in there. But the differentiator, putting in why you're going to be different than the other companies. And when you're smaller and you're not as big as those, and you're not as big as those other companies, you have to definitely show that differentiator. But you've got to be, if you're detailed and you've got a good narrative and you've got a good story, and your proposal stands out, then anybody with sense is going to look at it and go, well, I mean, I like the way they write their business proposal. Imagine how they would communicate if we hired them, if they're smart enough. Now, that's the client you want. If you got them looking at it just for low bid, then you move on. You're playing, it's part of the process. You're going to get the ones, though, that see the value. A couple of clients I have, man, it took 5 years minimum, but there were two huge feathers in my cap, and got me really to the point where I could start picking up bigger and bigger accounts. They even said, and I had all the largest contractors that are out there today on the planet that were bidding. They said, this is the best format I've ever seen. This is the most detailed. It explains everything. I appreciate that you have everything in here that would back up and support how you're going to get this job done. Not that you're just going to get this job done and here's going to be the price. And a lot of that I learned early on, with Chris. Like he said, the attention to detail in the proposal, putting in that, telling that story in there, making yourself stand out, making yourself look and feel just as big as the other company. And then you slide in the differentiator, and then you say, hey, I've been a small company, I'm hands-on. Then it's like you went from being down here, now you're up here. The smart person's going to look at it and go, look, we've already been through 3 companies in 6 years. Let's go with these guys. This makes perfect sense. That's my experience.
Good points. Well, gentlemen, I think we've covered the David versus Goliath topic well. Those watching this will take away some great strategies. Any final words to share before we wrap it up?
Sure. I would say if you want the big contracts, go for it. Be persistent. That's one thing I was taught. I was told by the first person that ever hired me in sales was I had no experience. They said I hired you because you were persistent. I could tell that you were going to keep coming, and you were going to keep working, and you weren't going to give up. And that's what you said in your interview, and I did. But there's also that level of patience. Be persistent, be patient, and be pleasant, and develop those relationships. I think it's all there, and everybody has an opportunity in today's world. Doesn't matter how big the company is you are, and I hope you figure that roadmap out. And I say go for it.